Welcome to the Fully Mindful podcast. I'm your host, Melissa. I designed this podcast for you. I'm so happy you're here. We are talking about what it means to live with more intention, creativity, and authenticity so we can make aligned connections. I'm a neurodivergent lawyer turned coach who found the healing power of breathwork and the powerful impact of mindfulness as we navigate this wild and beautiful ride of life. Here at The Fully Mindful, we dive deep with inspiring guests, share solo mini-sodes that are packed with tools you can apply immediately, and I mix it up a bit with tangents and sidebars, where my friend and host of the New World Normal podcast, Debbie Harrell, joins us for some down-to-earth, sometimes random, but always meaningful conversations. If you're ready to breathe, reflect, and grow, you're in the right place. Let's get fully mindful. Some stories and conversations are just too good to hear only once. That's why I'm bringing you a mashup of a few of listeners' favorite episodes from The Fully Mindful. These clips capture the heart, the wisdom, and aha moments that you've loved and maybe need to hear again. Ready to dive in? Check out the full episodes through the link in the show notes. Trust me, you won't want to miss these. Hey, y'all, you are going to want to grab a cup of coffee or tea and listen to this deeply fascinating conversation with Andrew Daniel, who is a leader in personal healing. He knows his work. He has done this work. He's dedicated wholly to the work of healing the self. And he's author of recently his book, Awaken to Your True Self, Why You're Still Stuck and How to Break Through. You really don't want to miss this. You know, their brain, their ego, there's something just shuts it down. Is like, yeah, I saw it, but I don't want to take any responsibility for this. No.
Yeah, it's exactly it. Yeah. And I clarify that in the book and take that to the next place and call it embodiment. Mm-hmm. So you can have the neck up knowledge, but unless it's embodied, it's really only going to have 5-10% of its power. And that's what happened to me. I knew all the stuff in my head from the neck up, but it wasn't embodied. I saw myself move and it's like, oh my God, this teaching of generosity and joy and love and abundance, I don't look abundant. Yeah, no wonder I have no money. I don't look abundant. I'm shut down and closed off and afraid of the whole world. There's not dollars coming into that person. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, it's the hardest thing I've ever done. It's the hardest thing almost all of my clients have ever done. And that's after usually decades of doing transformational work. But it ends up being the one thing that actually helps them break through. And it's just so beautiful to see. It saved my life. And yeah, but it's not for the faint of heart.
So let's talk about how do we take responsibility, right? So we learn these interesting, I'm going to use the word interesting, truths about ourselves and why we are where we are. And lots of successful people are still, like you said, suffering. So it's not like, oh, because you make $1 million a year and you're married, relatively happy and have wonderful children and all these successes, that doesn't mean that you're not suffering, right? So how do we stop? Well, one of the things that I love, I'm just going to go on a tangent here.
Yeah, no, go for it.
You have a section in the book about stop fixing, start living. And it's one of my favorite sections because I think so many of us can relate to this. And you've already talked about it. I'm going to just, if I take one more course, if I get one more certification, if I go to school 1 more year, 2 more years, 5 more years, if I do this thing, this therapy, this modality, this guru, this retreat, somehow I will suddenly be whole. And we get addicted to it. We get addicted. And I know I have, I've certainly been addicted to that because that's what's keeping me in the story in my case. And yeah, so talk a little bit about that, the stop the fixing, start living.
Yeah, that I came across that idea. I was doing a form of tapping. It was a certain form of tapping, clearing limiting beliefs, negative emotion kind of things. And I had a notebook like this. This doesn't have it, but a notebook like that with lists and lists and lists of all my negative emotions and limiting beliefs. And I would just, every day I would just sit down and all right, here I go. Tap, 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 clear, clear, clear. And it was helpful. I mean, like it was a really important part of my journey. But I did that for years. And I got to a place where one day I remember it very clearly. I'm sitting there with this list and I was adding to it faster than I was crossing it off.
Yeah.
And I looked at myself, I'm like, oh my God, I think that eventually I'm going to run out of stuff. I'm going to run out of things and then I'm going to be fixed. And it's not going to happen. This list is never going to end. Because even if I clear all of the stuff from this life, there's all my past life stuff to do. There's all the generational stuff to do. And then that'll be 20 years down the road. And in 20 years, I'll have new traumas and stuff and stories that come up that I have to deal with then. And I looked at this and I was terrified. I was terrified. I'm like, this isn't going to end.
Yeah.
Even though it's helpful. And so I knew at that moment, this is not going to realize peace. This is helpful. It's healing, but it's not going to realize peace. There's no end to it. And so there was an element of kind of facing the music and also an element of, oh, you know what I think I'm also doing here? I think I'm also avoiding living.
Yeah.
I think I'm hiding behind this until I feel like I'm enough and ready to go have the relationship, to start that business idea, to go out in the world and do this. I'm waiting until I'm perfectly healed to live a perfect life. And it was just a complete fantasy. I mean, it was such a delusion. And I was addicted to the fixing because I felt like I was broken. And it was like another realization of, oh, the more that I fix myself, the more that it's just validating that same story.
Yes.
And so that was how I came up with literally that phrase and that idea. It's like, oh, no, stop fixing. Just start living your life. And you get into the ready trap. I call it the ready trap. This trap that you got to be ready and you can't do anything until you're ready.
Today's interview with Mayda Poc is one of the most engaging and interesting conversations I've had about work, life, identity, and finding our purposes. From Wall Street to international life and career coach for executives in fast-paced industries, after more than 16 years in the financial industry in Paris, London, and New York City, in years of ignoring serious health concerns culminating in cancer, Mayda Poc left investment, but not first without a fight. After all, for Mayda, like so many of us, what we do is who we are. So you said that you use a little bit of NLP sometimes where appropriate, or emotional freedom technique. For those who are wondering what those are, can you tell us a little bit about how you use those and what those are?
Yes. It's part of reframing in reality. I think that sometimes we are so much in the habit of a lot of things that what the brain needs is a stop. And emotional freedom technique, which is called tapping as well, or even NLP, are one way to first to stop. The emotional tapping is we tap on certain meridian points that are very nodded in a way in the body, and that allow the body to communicate a sense of control and a sense of calmness to the rest of the body. NLP is one way of reframing. It's another way of, for me, is another way of showing the mind that there are other possibilities. As humans, we have this tendency to generalize. It's all or nothing. It's my way or the highway. It's everybody hates me. There are a lot of things a lot of assumptions that we base many of our decisions upon. But like any kind of mathematic formula, if the assumption is wrong, then the conclusion is definitely very wrong. And so NLP is one way of going back to these assumptions and just turning them around. Everybody hates me. Is that true? Is that everybody? Who and why and when? And all of a sudden the brain is like, okay, so maybe I'm in conflict with one person, but maybe I have a good reason to be in conflict with this person. So we use the power of the mind, that same power that make us sometimes miserable and completely depleted because, oh my goodness, and I'm a loser and I'm a quitter. Blah, blah. We use that to exactly the opposite, to say, hold on one second, I'm human, I'm a normal person. I also have my feelings, I also have my boundaries, my preferences, and this is not okay. Or I have been basing a lot of my assumptions on things that actually are not real. So how can I change that? And this is what NLP does. It is reprogramming the brain to see things from almost like an observer point of view, rather than from the body, mind, soul that has been reacting to an external trigger, and the body keeping these kind of imprint and rehashing them every single time. It's quite close to EMDR, which is a therapy technique where it allows you to find the roots of how the body has associated several sensations and feelings and emotions to one root experience that I had in life. But actually, anytime that I have this emotion, my body goes back to that root and remind me of that kind of trauma in a way that happened in my life at some point. So there is this re-triggering. So NLP, without going into therapy, is a bit like that as well. It's about retelling the brain that one incident is not general, that there is excessive filtering in the brain, because that's what we do. And the truth is actually quite dependent on the way we view it. And our truth is not universal and is not the truth. So we need to get out of our own way and explore our zone of excellence rather than stay in our zone of fear, which some people call your comfort zone. I have my personal opinions about comfort zone, but we can stay there. It's fine.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's fascinating. I know, I've certainly done my fair share of therapy and have benefited from it. But at one point, I think during one session, I said, I don't think this is really working anymore. And it was because my own thinking was trying to solve my own thinking problems. And, these neuro pathways were so well worn that I couldn't get out of them. I needed something else to pull me out of that so I could see them for what they were, which was just neuro pathways, just patterns of ways of thinking. And so something like I've done EMDR as well, and NLP and EFT, they are really excellent tools, especially for very left-brained people, which I think you're really working with, who are used to just being very analytical and linear and all that, and just not even participating in that part of the brain and just really getting over to the right side of the brain, or bridging those two sides and using something else so that you get out of those well-worn paths, those habits of thinking that are no longer serving us. Yeah. And, and sometimes we need that. And I know I've worked with people, and I even remember when I was working with a therapist and she brought up EMDR, she confessed that she was a little bit nervous about it because I am a lawyer and, I'm so logical. And I kind of thought, well, that's funny that that's her perception of me, but also I can understand that. And so she's like, well, are you willing to try something different? And it was like, well, yeah, that's what I want. And it has amazing results, whether it's EMDR, EFT, or NLP. Not that those are the only tools. Obviously, any form of deep inquiry or mindfulness techniques can really help people. But I love that you have this in your toolbox that you can use on more difficult cases like me. Like I would be one of your more difficult cases, right?
It's not, I don't think it's difficult. I think I call people intellectualizer. Is when we have been so primed to put everything in the brain, we forget that we have a body. And so we need to remind humans that we are a body first. The animal is a body. It exists without us. You can take the brain, you can put the brain on life support, whatever, the body will continue more or less living, right? Because we are primed to live. And so we need to involve the body in our decisions. We need to respect the body. If the body is revolting, if the body doesn't like a food, for example, there's no need to feed it more of it. So if the body is not reacting well to a certain stress that we're giving it, we need to pause, because that's how we create diseases. It's very simple. Unfortunately, not all diseases are self-created, but some of them come from stress and from prolonged exposure to, this kind of mind looping that we go into. And EFT in particular is a good way to go back into the body, because it's telling the body, I understand you are storing a lot of emotions. So let's go through these emotions. I'm giving myself permission to feel, because in all of these places, finance and what have you, we don't have the right to feel. It's forbidden, especially women. I mean, even men, they cannot show anger. Some of them do because it's a habit, but for most of them, you cannot show anger. You cannot show frustration. You cannot. And so this is a place where you give yourself permission to feel, even if it's not a socially pleasing kind of emotion, but you allow the body to say, I'm not happy, or I'm stressed out, or I'm actually feel disrespected. And then you allow the body to express yourself via the brain. And all of a sudden they're working together and not against each other. Isn't that nice?
And I'm here with Dr. Michael Amster, who I'm absolutely delighted to have on the Fully Mindful podcast. He is a physician and faculty member at Touro School of Medicine. He graduated from University of California, Irvine School of Medicine, and completed his pain management fellowship at the University of Iowa. He's also been a student of meditation for something like more than 30 years, as well as a certified yoga teacher and a meditation teacher at one of my favorite places on the planet, Spirit Rock Meditation Center. He's also taught all kinds of things like spine health, yoga classes, and founded a Buddhist Sangha interfaith meditation group.
Let's take a quick break.
Hey everyone, I'm excited to announce my 8-week Positive Intelligence program, the PQ program, starting February 25th to reduce stress, break through barriers, and tap into your true potential. With just 1 to 2 hours a week, you'll quiet inner saboteurs, strengthen your inner sage self, and build lasting mental fitness through live meetings, daily exercises in the PQ app, and powerful practices. Ready to transform? Set up a call with me today in the Calendly link in the show notes. We'll see you there.
One thing I did want to share, and I think it's important to bring up, because I notice for a lot of people that are just starting to build their awe muscle, they'll question, did I really just have a moment of awe? Like I didn't get the full body tingles. And we talk about in our book that awe happens on a spectrum. So most of the time for me, my awe is pretty subtle. It's just like a subtle maybe tingle or a feel that I feel different, or a sense of colors being brighter, or I just feel very present. Sometimes you experience what we call like a meta state, where you become the observer of the observed, like a level stepped back of awareness. And then it's the spectrum goes all the way up to what we call an orgasm, right? Where your whole body may tingle or chill, you get chills all over. You may start to cry because you're so emotional from that moment of awe. And what's important, again, is not to judge yourself on your practice, and to not be forceful, just to allow these moments to appear. And there's no right and wrong. It's just everyone has their own unique flavors of awe.
I love that. And I do think it's really important to highlight that, we're all going to have different experiences all at different times. And what we might experience even in the morning might be different than what we experience in the afternoon. And, the evidence is in. You've done the research, which I want to talk a little bit more about that research that was done preliminarily, I think it was during the pandemic. So it was 2020, the pandemic. Start doing this research with people in the medical field as well as people not in the medical field. And you found all this incredible stuff that you've already talked about, this improvement of anxiety, depression. And I guess I wanted to highlight that, because if there was ever a time to do that kind of study and really test the power of awe,
that was that.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, unbelievable.
Yeah, that research was, I mean, the whole experience of designing that study, actually there were two studies, and implementing it was truly an awe moment in and of itself. So right before the pandemic, my colleague and I, Jake, had both done our own pilot studies where we took about a dozen of our own patients through the awe method and taught a 21-day course. And we saw some incredible outcomes. I met up with Dacher Keltner, who's the founder of the Greater Good Science Center at UC Berkeley. And he's really I call him the granddaddy of awe research. He wrote the first paper that started to explore awe as a scientific emotion back in 2003. And so through his lab, when the pandemic struck, we reached out to him and said, hey, we really want to do something to make this, to help people that are struggling right now with so much depression, loneliness, anxiety. So very quickly, in a matter of less than 2 months, we designed the study, we got the approval from the research board, and we had recruited 300 primary care patients and also 200 doctors and nurses and healthcare professionals on the front lines that were, knee deep in the stress and the throes of the horrors of the pandemic. And at that time, also when the study launched in 2020 in June, we also were having the race riots that were happening and the protests that were going on as well. So it was a really dark time for all of us, with rates of depression skyrocketing and burnout for healthcare professionals. And so that's at the stage. And in the 21-day program, like I shared earlier, we saw these profound statistical significance that support the evidence that this practice changes people's health physically and emotionally in very profound ways in just 21 days of developing this mindful practice of experiencing moments of awe in the ordinary. And what's exciting for us is we're still exploring more research on this area. It feels like we're just starting. We have another study that we're launching at the very end of February at UC Davis with UC San Francisco, looking at long COVID patients that are suffering from all the brain fog and the depression and low energy and fatigue, all from long COVID syndrome, which is affecting 23 million Americans. And we don't even know what to do about it. Like, we don't really have cures for it yet. But we believe that understanding how the awe method works in the brain and in the body, that it should help people that are suffering from long COVID. And then we're really excited about even further research of looking at patients that have had cardiac events and how the awe method will help with cardiac rehab, because we know that awe is the only positive emotion that decreases inflammatory cytokines in the body. So, I mean, that is incredible, that the emotion of awe, it's not, gratitude or generosity or compassion, love. It's the emotion of awe that statistically lowers these inflammatory intracellular communicators that result in chronic heart disease, diabetes, cancers. Pretty much most chronic illnesses are a result of inflammation in the body. Even depression is considered a neuro-inflammatory condition. And so awe lowers inflammation, significantly in our bodies and in our brains. And so the research that we're going to be doing is really exciting, like exploring more into how awe is really the most powerful of all emotions.
I'm here with the lovely, the amazing, the talented, the beautiful, the wise Saraswati Hewitt. Yeah, and I guess I want to get your take too. You alluded to it a little bit of we're coming. It's really important to recognize the history and where yin and other yoga comes from. And, it's been pretty whitewashed in this country. I'm glad that yoga is everywhere and available. And yet, there's a little bit of this danger, here you and I are, fairly dominant culture here, and we get to access this. What's your sense of that, and what, if anything, can we do to remedy, any whitewashing that has already happened?
Well, the first thing that I do is I literally end every class by saying the same thing. I tell people, remember, it is an honor and privilege to practice yoga and meditation. Remember that for thousands of years, these were secrets of families in places like India and China. So I have people recognize that, so we're constantly remembering it. I also really encourage people to take classes from people who are from like Asia, Southeast Asia. In my training, for example, I do a 100-hour. One of the first sections that we teach is actually something that's taught by Susanna Barkataki, who is a brilliant woman who I believe grew up in India and maybe England. And she's been, I don't know, practicing yoga probably 40 or 50 years or something. And she teaches sections on cultural appropriation. And she has a really beautiful way of explaining things and can answer a lot of questions about history of yoga. But I think a lot of it is just to be open to learning and to be, realizing that it's really cool for us to have this and to look at ways that we can support not only teachers from these places, but the places themselves. Like one of the things that I really want to work on is we're not really supposed to even teach yin in America. So I'm always like the punk rock one. And I'm like, yo, we should basically be going to China and find this family. And every yin studio should be fucking paying them because we really don't have, it's like, I mean, I don't know. I get beef sometimes with how people do stuff because I'm like, remember, people had to carry these traditions when it wasn't cool and it wasn't easy. And just because we decided it was cool or whatever, and, like it doesn't mean that like it belongs to us, and yoga is very strong and for thousands of years has existed, this beautiful, tiny 4-letter word. It can mean so many things, but it stays strong. But I think it's just, we're at a point where we can see that, like, especially even with yin getting popular, we are ready for more of the deeper roots of yoga. And like, when I was in India, this was probably 17 years ago. I remember I was in Rishikesh, which is like beautiful yoga city of the world, right? We have one of those. That's cool. So I was at the yoga city of the world and I would go down to the Ganges and I would talk with people. And I'm like 23 and I'm like, I teach yoga in America, right? Like I'm just like such a dork. And everyone was so cool. They were all like, awesome. We love that you love yoga. And they were all just kind of the same. They were like, look, we've had yoga for a long time and we're going to keep telling you the same shit, which is that you should just meditate and chill and you're going to keep doing ashtanga until you work that shit out. And like, it was kind of funny because they were all saying the same thing. They were like, burn through this physical obsession with the asana and then you will understand more about yoga. So it's very exciting that we have this sweep now from vinyasa, ashtanga, Bikram style, stuff like that. And we've really got this big wave of yin, which it's very needed. Our nervous systems really need it. But what's really cool about it, here's what's even more exciting, is that by swinging into yin, we teach yin in such a certain way where it's always about harmony. And that's part of what really sold me on yin. When I went to yin, and at one point, like, overstretched my glutes, Paul Greeley was like, don't do pigeon or swan anymore. Go back to the gym and start doing squats. And I was like, the head of yin just sent me to the gym. I was like, what? I was like, I love these guys. I was like, I'm so sold because they're martial artists and they're not like, you should only do this one thing. They're like, that's crazy. Pro athletes cross train for a reason. So what's great about yin is that yin is going to give us a better foundation in general to be like, on and off of our mat, why do we do what we do? Because the Taoist principle is harmony. So if it's not bringing you harmony, you got to question why you do it. And it's a really great way to live, right? It's a great principle because if you start, we joke that you go yin side and you never go back. Because once you go yin side and you go, wait, do I even need this stretch? Or, do I need to put more strengthening here? Or is this side different than this, right? When we start going yin side, we have this awareness. When we're in our lives, when we're in our jobs, our relationship, we start to be like, wait, how does this feel? Does this work? Did this used to work? What's really happening here? And we start to view things in a different way.
Thank you for joining me on the Fully Mindful podcast. If you got value from this episode, I'd love for you to subscribe, leave a review, or share this episode with someone who'd love this content too. Remember, small moments of mindfulness can lead to big changes in your day-to-day life. Until next time, take a deep breath, stay present, and tap into your own mindfulness. I'll see you next week.